For video 2 of compression, I'm going to kind of explain a little bit more of how we're using it today and the evolution of it. So, again, talking about why dynamic range compression. When we're talking about a compression ratio, the easiest way to kind of explain it is that a 1-to-1 just means that if I have 10 decibels coming in, I'm going to allow 10 decibels to go out. A 2-to-1 basically means that if I have 10 decibels coming in, I'm only going to allow 5 decibels to come out. All right, 2-to-1. And it gets a little bit more complex when we're talking about the gain that we're already using for the hearing aid. Again, here I'm using a 40 decibel hearing aid. So at 20 decibels, I'm going to add 40 because I'm on a 1-to-1. At 40 decibels, I'm going to add 40 because I'm on a 1-to-1, which brings me to 80. But once I start to implement a 2-to-1, it basically means that at 80, I'm no longer going to add 40, I'm going to only add 20. And that brings me to 100. So what we talk about here is just the compression ratio really on one frequency or a range of frequencies. And when we first started to go from linear hearing aids to nonlinear hearing aids, we basically did it across the whole frequency range, whatever the hearing aid could cover, 250 to 4,000 or 500 to 6,000, whatever the case was. Our compression scheme was going to take place across the whole board, and that was called broadband compression. What I started to find is that we got to 2-channel, and this was really a huge deal. And what I was able to do is basically have a compression scheme for my high frequency sounds and a compression scheme for my low frequency sounds. So say with high frequencies, I wanted them to come in with the gain that I had placed for the hearing aid, so I want a 1-to-1. But say with the lower frequencies, I wanted to put a 2-to-1 compression because they were doing really well in their lows and they were going to pick up too much background noise. So I would add a 2-to-1 compression for my lows. And how we did this is by filters. And I would have a high pass filter, which would allow highs to pass. And I would have a low pass filter, which would allow lows to pass. And utilizing that, I could go to a level management. From there, I can go to a compression characteristic and therefore add a different compression scheme to my lows than from my highs and deal with them separately. And then together that would end up giving me my output. So my input would go through this chain of command to give me my output. Now, what we're doing is that instead of just doing low pass and high pass, we're going to do something a bit more complex where I'm actually going to have a filter bank. The filter bank allows me to do this on multiple channels or bands. And lo and behold, the multi-channel hearing aid. Now, depending on what book or study that you read, channels and bands do get intertwined, which can be a little frustrating. But when we're talking about the multi-channel hearing aid, that basically means that at 8 or 12 channels, I can split up the frequencies and then add different compression schemes through them, having a better success with my patient. How I like to see it is how many channels I have and how many frequencies I can split apart. I like to consider that channels. But out of that, which frequencies can I adjust easily in my fine-tuning? I like to consider it bands, but it is something that gets interchanged a lot, so don't get frustrated. So now that we talked about compression and being able to do it across multiple frequencies, we have to realize how quickly do we want to implement this compression, especially with something being able to really do something as fast compression or do something as slow compression. And so what I kind of want to show here is that this brings a whole nother element to what we're trying to do. And say at 55 decibels, I'm okay with it. I'm adding gain to keep it at 55 decibels. This is where the patient really enjoys sound and where they're getting the most information from. and then a sound will come up and it will come up to about 80 decibels, and what I need to do is add compression to get it back down to about 55, which is where I want to be. And so how we need to do this is that, okay, now I have a compression ratio of whatever I picked. How quickly do I want to, kick that into gear? And so there's fast compression and low compression, and what we usually like to do is an instantaneous type of combination of the two, which gets pretty complex. But I do want to show you the difference between fast and slow compression and what side effects we can have. So what can happen with fast compression? Fast compression seems like, why wouldn't I ever not want to have fast compression? And the reason is that it's going to really try to keep pushing that down even if the sound is staying at 80. And so it's something to where it's going to pulsate to where when the sound jumps up, very quickly it's going to keep trying to push it down, and then finally when it does push it down, I've gone below where I want to be, and this is called an undershoot. And so this whole time it's really trying to fight against this loud sound, which sounds good, but because it gives this pulsating type side effect, it can really steal from intelligibility of speech. And fast compression for a patient that might already be having processing issues, they might be getting older, this is something that will make things very garbled. So, all right, I have a side effect there if my compression is too fast. And so what happens if I use slow compression? It's very smooth. So that's a good thing. My compression will be slow, very smooth. Oh, here comes a loud sound. I want to pump the brakes. But it's so smooth that I allow an overshoot. And this overshoot will allow sound to get higher than I really want it to. But it's done it in a very smooth transition, but you can see it also leaves me with a side effect. And then when I start to come down, I'll also have an undershoot. Again, just because of its smooth, slower compression, we'll also run into side effects. So that's why having an instantaneous filter that can kind of go back and forth is really something that it will kind of meet in the middle. And so what I'll have is a little bit of both side effects. It's hard to not have an overshoot or an undershoot, but at least utilizing something that's more instantaneous where the filter is kind of doing fast and slow and there's different time constraints that I can avoid both side effects.